Hello and welcome to Radical Self-Care for HR Warriors. I am so happy that you can be here and we got a lot to cover, so let's go ahead and jump in. First thing I'm going to do is share my screen. I do have a PowerPoint for y'all today. Okay, let me Okay, I can figure this out. All right, so my name is Jen, and I have been in human resources for over 20 years. I actually just shifted away about 6 months ago to go more into coaching, working with organizations, working with other HR professionals, and really helping to bring in soft skills, emotional intelligence, and other things more into the workplace. So I am super happy that you are here. I know, we're all so busy, but I think that this is an area that's really important for us to be talking more about. And it's self-care. So I think so many of us really we understand the value of self-care, but for whatever reason, for most of us, it ends up being a real struggle. And in HR in particular, we have such unique roles where we are truly in the middle, right? Like between the needs of our employer, the employees, and then also trying to have, a life outside of work. And that can be so challenging. But the good news is that for people who work in HR, a SHRM survey pre-COVID, so I'd be curious to see what it is now, but a SHRM survey had said that 86% of people in HR love what they do. And that really is very telling. We get into HR because we are all about giving back to others. We want to see people grow. We want to be able to make a difference, right? And I think that's amazing. But the interesting thing is when it comes down to whether or not we're really taking care of ourselves in the way that we know that we should. And only 32% of us actually do. So there is the disconnect, right? And after 2020 and 2021, that was the hardest year for over 70% of people in HR. So I believe self-care is more important than ever. So again, I'm really happy that you're here. I hope you get a lot of value out of this because this is something that I feel like could be an incredible benefit for our lives. Okay, so let's start with defining what exactly is self-care. So I've pulled from a couple different, dictionaries and that sort of thing, a couple definitions. One is that it's an acknowledgement that you matter, right? It's acknowledgement that your mental health, your emotional health, your physical health, they all matter. And when we are taking care of ourselves at the highest level, then that is going to cascade to everyone else around us. And so it really does matter. It's also about listening to and following your heart around what you really want and need in your own life. I think so often, so many of us, and I think in HR particularly, we're guilty of this, is that we are all about people pleasing. We're all about pleasing other people because that is part of what our job is. And so it can get a little bit confusing, I think, for some of us to separate out the people pleasing that we need to do sometimes for our jobs and the people pleasing that we do not need to be doing in our own lives. So I think, recognizing that is really important because I think many of us don't really realize that in the way that I feel like we can. And it's important to realize that. Okay, next slide. What is self-care not? So self-care, and we're going to talk about this here in just a little bit, but self-care is not selfish. And that is a really tricky one for so many of us. And it's something that's kind of deep within us when we really start to analyze it. So self-care is definitely not selfish. The other thing is self-care is not about indulgence. And that can be really tricky as well, because I am personally very, very guilty many, many, many times after a long day of work, immediately thinking the first thing I want to do when I get home is pour myself a glass of wine, right? And that really is something to start paying attention to. And so there are three questions that I think are really important when it comes to what you're currently doing now and calling self-care and whether or not it truly is caring for yourself. The first question is, does this activity add to or deplete your energy? Do you feel better at the end of it, or do you feel the same or worse? Number two, does the activity feel loving? Does it feel compassionate to you? Because isn't that what self-care should be, is about self-love and self-compassion. And then the last one is that, does the activity ever cause you to feel guilty or unhappy with yourself? Yeah, that drinking the wine thing. Not so much feeling great about that the next day, right? Especially if that one glass turned into two or three or whatever. So it's really, really important to pay attention to that, because on the front end, it feels like it's caring for myself, right? Oh, I really need that glass of wine. It's going to feel so good, right? But on the back end, not so much. So watching out for that's super important. Benefits of self-care, so many benefits of self-care. And starting with just our overall stress level. I mean, if you are part of that 70% that has struggled from burnout and exhaustion after the last couple of years, we need less stress, right? And less stress is what comes from up here, right? It's not the external world around us that's going to make us feel less stressed or less overwhelmed. The only way that's going to happen is when we're taking care of ourselves. Higher self-esteem, higher emotional intelligence, really starting to become aware of maybe some of the stories that we're telling ourselves, some of the ways that we talk ourselves out of doing the things in our lives that would most serve us. Relationships improve. This is so important, the relationship not only with yourself, right, but also the relationships that you have with everybody around you at home and at work. And then finally, there are reports of higher levels of gratitude, higher levels of mindfulness, and an overall higher level of life fulfillment. So important. But self-care, it's hard. It's actually really hard for so many of us. And I personally feel like it's time that we start talking openly and honestly about this. Why the frick is self-care so dang hard? And there is science behind it. And so that is really why I am here with you today, is to help us to understand, first and foremost, why it matters, and then why it is so hard. So then we may be able to consciously and intentionally choose a different path for ourselves. So it's really important to know these things and really become very aware of them so that we can make a new choice for our future. Okay, so I have 5 reasons why self-care is so hard for so many of us. For so many of us, sorry. Reason number 1, we already talked a little bit about it, and self-care is not selfish. When we think about the most kind of evolved people, who have ever lived, you think Mother Teresa, you think Gandhi, right? You think of these individuals who are so selfless, so giving of themselves, right? You would never picture Mother Teresa in a bubble bath, right? But that, I think, is such an interesting fallacy, because of course they must have taken care of themselves, because when you are taking care of yourself at the highest level, you are giving back to others at the highest level. It's amazing how that happens, but you automatically in your life start showing up in a completely different way. And so that in of itself is the opposite of selfish. Next one, self-care must be earned. This is one I have struggled with in my life, that I had this running story in my head where, okay, if I hustle hard enough, if I do all the things, if I get all the crap done, if I do all that stuff, then I'm going to schedule myself a massage or take a bubble bath or whatever, right? And that is, it's so backwards. It's so freaking backwards. And the more that I am starting to try to rewrite that story, the more fascinating it is when that comes up for me, that I continue to find myself talking myself out of taking care of myself. So important to pay attention to that, because if for whatever reason you don't feel like you're worthy of that self-care until fill in the blank, that's a problem. Because what that means is you're not recognizing how much better you're going to show up for that thing or for that project or whatever if you are taking better care of yourself. So it's really backwards, I know, but that's where just this awareness piece begins, is to just start becoming more aware of that is a story that you're telling yourself. Third one, no time is the third one. Boy, is this a really interesting one. So many of us go through our lives, we're hustling, we're busy, 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 right? Just from sun up to sundown. But are we though? Like, are we really that busy that we can't take care of ourselves? Like when it comes to how many times we're picking up our phone to check social media, when it comes to how many times we're going online to check YouTube, or I could go on and on and on, right? And so when we have this running story in our head that we don't have the time to take better care of ourselves because of all these other things on our to-do list, we are missing, we're missing a critical piece around, are we being honest with ourselves if that is true? Or are we, kind of so wrapped up in our day that we're just not paying attention? So paying attention again, is going to come up with every one of these, because the more attention that we're paying to these areas, the more we start to recognize that really that's just some story that's going on in our heads that we don't have the time. And similar to no time is no energy. I'm too tired, right? This is something that I would do as well. I come home from work, I'm just exhausted. I know I should be working out. I know I should be meditating. I know that I should be doing all these things, but there's this story going on in my head around how exhausted I am. I just don't have the energy. I'll do it tomorrow, right? But in reality, taking better care of ourselves is going to fuel us with energy. Right? So it's like, again, backwards thinking that we have in our heads, that we think, oh, I can't make time for that right now because I'm just so tired. And so when we start challenging that, which, again, is so important to do, when we start challenging that thinking, we'll start to realize that it's complete bull crap. And it's not real. It's just the story that we've been telling ourselves in our heads again. Last one is unhealthy indulgence. So we already talked a little bit about this, but I really feel like it's important to add on at the end here, because every single one of us has something in our lives that we turn to when we start feeling overwhelmed, when we start feeling tired and exhausted and whatever. For some of us, it might be TV. For some of us, it might be shopping. For some of us, it might be alcohol. For some, it might be, eating. We all have something, and being very aware to what those things are that we turn to, and whether or not those things that we turn to are either serving us or not serving us in our lives is everything. It is so, so important to do that. And so many of us struggle with this because we turn to these indulgences as a quick and easy way of being able to not feel the stress, not feel the overwhelm, right? We're trying to get rid of the emotion that we're feeling. And the risk to doing that, it creates so much drama in our heads when we are turning to those indulgences. So these 3 questions that I have on here are just really, really important to be paying attention to in your own life. Okay, so what's really going on? Why the disconnect? Why, over and over am I saying, well, we know that we should be doing it, yet we're not really doing it, right? Why is that happening? And Jane Goodall, who is a scientist and works with chimpanzees and apes, has this quote that I love so much. And really, what is happening is there is a disconnect between your head and your heart, that we know that we, will benefit from taking better care of ourselves. But over and over and over again, there is a script that's running behind the scenes in our brains, talking us out of it over and over again. And so it's something that I have studied a lot, both while I was in human resources and now as a coach. And what I've really learned is so fascinating. And it really comes down to human and brain evolution. And so without going too much into kind of the weeds of it, I want to kind of give you a general overview. So basically, if you think of the evolution of human beings, right, we've been around for thousands and thousands of years, right? But it's only been within the last couple of years that a human being is not just living to survive, right? Like day in and day out, a human being 500 years ago was just about trying to find safety, security, comfort, and trying to make sure that they stayed alive. And so the reason that that's so important now is, as human beings, our brains are not quite as evolved as we would want to believe that they are. We are super smart in so many ways, but when it comes to the evolution of the human being, many of the things that we believed as earlier humans are still stuck in our brains. So when it comes down to wanting to change anything that we are doing or being or having in our lives, our brains tend to get in our way, because they are motivated by really essentially three things. Our brains are motivated to avoid pain and discomfort, hence going to the indulgences and all the things that we do to not feel pain and discomfort. We are wired to seek pleasure and enjoyment, hence the glass of red wine, hence anything that we do to avoid the pain and discomfort is going for the easy fix. And then three, we are wired to exert as little energy as possible when it comes to achieving a goal or doing an activity, right? If you think about tying our shoes, brushing our teeth, we want it to be as easy and as quick as possible. So when we have different things going on in our brains around the stories that we're telling ourselves, the beliefs that we might have, they could be way back in our brains, because it is doing its absolute best to exert as little energy as possible. So it's kind of wild as a trip, but it's true. All right. So we've been talking about awareness quite a bit over the course of this webinar, and I want to just spend a little bit more time digging into it. So let's really recognize the power and importance of awareness, because it is the first step of being able to start to wake up so we can really start to prioritize our lives in different ways, starting with ourselves. And so it's critical that we start to recognize how and why we talk ourselves out of going outside of our comfort zones. It's important that we are honest with ourselves, truly honest with ourselves. Who else is going to do it for us, right? And when we are truly honest with ourselves, we're going to find some really fascinating things about what we've been telling ourselves around our potential, what we've been telling ourselves around our worthiness, what we've been telling ourselves around everything. So awareness is the beginning. All right, so breaking through this and really starting to prioritize ourselves higher is going to completely change your life. Because at the end of the day, it's all about unconditionally loving yourself. I think we as humans tend to be just so freaking hard on ourselves, right? We are so hard on ourselves. We judge ourselves way harder than anyone else probably has ever even considered judging ourselves. And so I really want to rewrite the script for as many people as possible when it comes to how we show up for ourselves, how we believe in ourselves. And so I truly am excited and really can't wait to launch a new Facebook group. So I'm going to go to the next screen. So I'm launching a new Facebook group called HR in the Middle. And it's a support group for HR professionals, basically. And what it is I feel like there's lots of different groups out there that talk laws and compliance and policies and best practices in HR. And those are all great. And I love them for what they do. But this group is not that at all. This is a group where we take care of each other, where we take care of ourselves, that we empower one another, lift each other up, inspire us to want to show up in our lives with more confidence, with more, resiliency, with more bravery, to want to be able to be the HR professional and also person that you truly want to be in your lives. So within this group, I will be doing daily posts that are inspirational and around topics that so many of us struggle with. And then I'm also going to be doing weekly Facebook Lives where I will come on and just talk about an issue that many of us struggle with, such as confidence, being able to really truly ask for what you want in your life. There'll be a live around imposter syndrome. So many of us question whether or not we truly feel like we deserve to have a seat at the table. And we do, so I really want to talk to that. And I really want us to recognize our inner strength and our inner power. So I look forward to having each of you join the group. I will send an email out if you haven't already received it with the link to the group. And I can't wait to see you in there. All right, well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you. I appreciate the community, and I look forward to learning and growing and thriving with each and every one of you. All right, I'm going to stop that. Okay, thank you so very much and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.